I want to talk to you about the F word. No, not that F word. I'm talking about fascism. Is Donald Trump really a fascist, as some would say? Or is the word authoritarian sufficient? The term fascism is often used loosely, but you can generally identify fascists by their hate of the other, vengeful nationalism, and repression of dissent.
Lots of negativity. Lots of negative stereotypes. You can generally tell a fascist by the fact that he's a total piece of shit with no likable characteristics whatsoever.
We need to be aware of what they are and how they fit together. Let's examine the 5 elements that define fascism and what makes it distinct from and more dangerous than authoritarianism. First,
more
rejection of democracy.
Fascism is more dangerous than authoritarianism. That's an interesting claim. I mean, can fascism be dangerous without being authoritarian?
Of a strong man. Authoritarians believe strong leaders are needed to maintain stability, so they empower strong men, dictators, or absolute monarchs to maintain social order through the use of force. But fascists view strong leaders as the means of discovering what society needs. They regard the leader as the embodiment of society, the voice of the people.
I am your voice.
Well, then you're a pretty good representative of the country because you're pretty fucking stupid.
Second, stoking rage against cultural elites. Authoritarian movements cannot succeed without at least some buy-in from establishment elites. While fascist movements often seek to co-opt the establishment.
Yeah. The Nostalgia Critic reminded us that Trump made an appearance in Home Alone 2. But what that means is that Chris Chan is 6 degrees away from Hitler. Did you guys know that? Chris Chan is 6 degrees removed from Hitler. Because Chris Chan met Lusty Justy. Lusty Justy met Macaulay Culkin. Macaulay Culkin met Donald Trump. Donald Trump met Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II met her uncle Edward VIII. And Edward VIII met Hitler. So Chris Chan is 6 degrees away from Hitler.
Largely depend on fueling resentment and anger against presumed cultural elites for supposedly displacing regular people. Fascists rile up their followers to seek revenge on the elites.
The out-of-touch media elites, the political elites, but the elites from the elites who led us from one financial...
So this is an interesting paradigm here. Because in the last video, the guy, Horses, said fascism is elitist and populist. And what we're seeing here is that this guy is saying that fascism riles up the population against the elites, but against specifically, I think he calls them the social elites, cultural elites.
Followers to seek revenge. They cannot succeed without at least some buy-in from establishment elites.
Let's hear this again.
While fascist movements often seek to co-opt the establishment, they largely depend on fueling resentment and anger against presumed cultural elites.
Presumed cultural elites. So what we're talking about here is a broad range of different things. But you know, one of them is, for instance, the Jews. Like a lot of fascists or fascist-adjacent people will talk about the Jews as some sort of monolithic cultural elitist club, which is kind of a simplification of the truth. But you see other versions of this rhetoric out there too. Looking to historical examples, specifically in the fascist movement, I can't really recall off the top of my head a lot of examples of fascists specifically stoking tensions against a perceived cultural elite. What I can think of is fascists stoking tensions against the plutocratic nations, as they called them, or Mosley called them financial democracy. The empires of the United States, Great Britain, France. And then these tensions will be stoked both within and without those countries. So, like, Mosley will rally people against, like, the parliamentarians, who he called the talking shop at Westminster, for instance. But, I don't remember seeing a lot of talk about, like, cultural elites. That's not to say that there wasn't any. I just don't remember that from my research. But I do see that a lot in modern day America on the conservative right. That's where I see it a lot. So I don't know if what he's saying is true in that it's a characteristically fascist idea. Definitely it's true if we're talking about the Jews in their relationship with the Nazis and with other fascists. Like, there are a lot of anti-Semitic Jews. There were anti-Semitic Jews, but there were a lot of anti-Semitic fascists in Great Britain, even though Mosley claimed that he was against that sort of talk. There was definitely a perception of a Yiddish sort of hegemony that they wanted to dismantle. All right.
Supposedly displacing regular people. Fascists rile up their followers to seek revenge on the elites.
The out-of-touch media elites, the political elites, but the elites from the elites who led us from one financial and foreign policy disaster to another.
They create mass political parties and demand participation. They encourage violence.
You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. Knock the crap out of him, would you? And we fight. We fight like hell.
Third, nationalism based on superior race and historic bloodlines. Authoritarians see nationalism as a means of asserting the power of the state. For fascists, the state embodies what is considered a superior group based on race, religion, and historic bloodlines. To fascists, the state is a means of asserting that superiority.
When Mexico sends its people...
It's not necessarily about superiority. This is a misconception, I think. There's definitely a chauvinism in fascism. And there's definitely ways where they look at their own nation and say, we're great in certain ways. Maybe ways that other nations aren't. But you'll notice that there is a lot of cooperation between fascists in different countries. And I think I think there's a stereotype that the fascists are all like, yeah, my people are the greatest and everyone else sucks. That's not really true. I think when you really look at the things they say, and the way they talk about other countries, the way they talk about other races, they're a lot more diplomatic than people give them credit for. Like, even when it comes to black people, like, Mosley refused to say that white people were superior to black people, for instance. And he rejected any kind of rhetoric like that. what you'll see more commonly is that they will say that different races and different cultures and different nations, they have different characteristics. And they have different strengths and weaknesses. But then, at the same time, you can't give them too much lenience, because I don't think they're always entirely honest. Like Nick Fuentes, who isn't really a fascist, but he's fascist adjacent for sure. He'll talk about how, like, black people are not necessarily worse than white people. White people are not necessarily better than black people. He'll talk about that, but then he'll also be like, you know, dropping N-words and disparaging black people sometimes. And so it's never entirely clear what these people's position is. There's definitely a chauvinism there. There's definitely a racism there, but how much of it is white supremacism and how much of it is a belief in the supremacy of your own country, it's a little bit up for debate, I think. Big Forever Dirt fan, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. Big Ryan fan, by the way. Okay, Ray C is saying, perhaps if Native Americans had the means to rebel and what? Do you want to finish that sentence? And demand what they lost, would they be considered fascist, even though their mentality and ways are obsolete compared to the rest around them? Yeah, I mean, I don't think they would be considered fascist by most people. But would that be fair to make an exception for them just because, unlike a lot of other countries that have victim narratives, their victim narrative is like actually like demonstrably true? But I don't think that would mean that they're not fascist. But that, yeah, I mean, that wouldn't make them fascist anyway, just if they were rebelling and demanding what they lost. There are other considerations. Oh, my back hurts. I've had a lot of back pain lately.
Sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you.
Fascists worry about disloyalty.
And then the whole thing he said about African countries being shithole countries, which is true, but you can't be saying that kind of stuff if you're a president. But, you know, like, what he was saying there, he was saying they're not sending their best. So what that implies is that there is a best there that they could be sending over. They're just sending over the worst elements of them. That's not a statement of superiority of the U.S. It's just a statement of, like, it's sort of antagonizing Mexico. Like, look at what they're doing. They're taking advantage of us because they're smart. And this is something that Trump liked to do a lot. He liked to kind of upplay the intelligence and craftiness of the other countries in the geopolitical game. Like, he did that with China, too. He did that with Russia. And he would be like, look, these guys are smart. They're taking advantage of it. We're the dumbasses here. And so I'm just a businessman looking at this and saying, this is a bad deal. I wouldn't make this deal. You know, if I were in charge of the country, I'd be making deals that actually benefited us. So it's really a transactional business kind of approach to politics. It's not really a racial, like supremacist position at all. But the thing about it that gave it strength on the far right is that it could still then appeal to people with those tendencies. Not says, sorry for the sudden question, but would you be okay with someone making art of you? Yes, I would. R says, I know no one said this to you, but you're really good looking. Why do you think no one said this to me? Plenty of people have said that to me. And I am really good looking. Thanks for noticing it. Not agrees, I guess. He wanted to be a father figure for the disregarded.
Loyalty and replacement by groups that don't share the same race or bloodlines.
And I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
Fascists encourage that superiority.
When Mexico sends its people, you.
Fascists worry about disloyalty and replacement by groups that don't share the same race or bloodlines.
And I think
Disloyalty or replacement. Two very different concepts being kind of lumped in the same point. So here we have Trump talking about disloyalty.
I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
Fascists
Interesting that he talks about Jews being disloyal. Disloyal to what? Disloyal to America or disloyal to the Jewish race? I'm not really sure what the context is of him saying that. Because it can be taken either way. And I know that Donald Trump is a Zionist. Bob Bobby says, what do you know about modern European politics? Not much, just kind of, the basic stuff that gets filtered on into the United States media. I know a little bit more about British politics than anything else in Europe. I know a few names of world leaders like Viktor Orban and Emmanuel Macron and the former Chancellor of Germany, Merkel. I know a few names and I know basics about their political positions, but that's kind of it. I know a bit about British politics, but still not a whole lot.
encourage their followers to scapegoat, expel, and sometimes even kill such others. Fourth, extolling brute strength.
Yeah, scapegoat, other, and sometimes kill. I don't think Donald Trump has ever told people to kill perceived others. So, like, he's presenting this, and he'll present these really kind of these exaggerations of Trump. And then he'll show a clip of Trump saying something that kind of resembles the exaggeration, and then he'll move on. And there's not really a lot of cross-examination. There's not really a lot of critical evaluation here. It's a short video, but you can see the propaganda at play where he's using a lot of language and then artfully kind of maneuvering around that language to convince people of something. And it does seem that this video is, inching toward the idea that Donald Trump is a fascist.
And heroic warriors. The goal of authoritarianism is to gain and maintain state power at any cost. For authoritarians, strength comes in the form of large standing armies that can enforce their rule. They seek power to wield power. Fascists seek state power to achieve their ostensible goal, achieving their vision of society. Fascism accomplishes this by rewarding those who win economically and physically, and denigrating or even exterminating those who lose.
Can we hear that again?
Accomplishes this by rewarding those who win economically and physically, and denigrating or even exterminating those who lose.
We're seeing again a repeat of the thing that the guy, Horses, in the last video brought up, of this Darwinian aspect of fascism. Again, I'm not really sure where they're getting that from. Like, survival of the fittest, reward the people who succeed and punish the people who lose. Where are you getting that from? Everything that I read about fascism suggested that it's supposed to be about uplifting the better nature of people and uplifting the side of people and supporting the side of people that is most in agreement with the values of fascism, rather than punishing people for being like perceived weak. That seems more like a Nazi thing to me. That seems more like a Hitler thing to me. Bob Bobby says, thoughts on Brexit then? Personally, I'm agnostic about Brexit, whether it's a good idea or not to leave the European Union. For a long time, Brexit was in a state of them trying to figure out how to work out a deal. And then they set a hard limit for, like, this is when we have to exit no matter what. You would probably know more about that. What actually happened? Did they leave the European Union? How did they leave? Like, what did they get in the deal in the end? Because I haven't heard about Brexit ever since the Theresa May years. But yeah, I mean, I remember way back, even back in the early 2010s, seeing Lindy Beige talk about how, you know, he was skeptical of the EU, and he's like, what actually is Britain getting out of the EU? And so it was interesting to see how the UK Independence Party guys kind of brought that into public consciousness. But I don't know what the right answer was. I mean, people, like, most people on the left seem to be anti-Brexit. But at the same time, it did win a pot. So, yeah. But a lot of it also, like, there's a lot of confusion around Brexit because the economic stuff then got overshadowed by a lot of culture war stuff having to do with immigration. Racy says maybe Trump was referring to the chasm between the fundamentalist and secular Jews and the entrepreneurial and greedy type. Fundamentalist and secular Jews, entrepreneurial, and so like the fundamentalist and entrepreneurial ones are the ones he's more a fan of, whereas the secular and greedy ones are the ones that he's not. Yeah, that's common among anti-Semites. That's a common, like, there are good Jews and bad Jews, and what we have to do is distinguish between the good religious Jews and the bad atheistic Jews. That was basically, what's his name? Charles Coughlin. Completely, they pretty much cut off everything. Yeah, that's kind of what it sounded like. He says, the part I find interesting is the whole topic of European bureaucracy and lack of democracy and issues about what is important when it comes to who makes decisions. Yeah, that was a big thing that people like Sargon of Akkad were bringing up. Their concerns about. And Sargon had a lot of fear-mongering about, like, the possibility of creating a European army. Apparently that's something that Europe was talking about for a while. Like, he was really getting the sense that that Europe was a bureaucracy. It was not democratically controlled. And so as it starts kind of thinking of itself more as a united entity, that poses a threat to national sovereignty. I don't know how valid those concerns were, but those were his concerns. Carl says there out and currently negotiating trade agreements. Lots of stuff concerning the Irish border, etc. Yeah. Racy says, I'm from the UK and Brexit was like shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah, that seems to be how a lot of people felt.
Fascism depends on organized bullying, a form of social Darwinism.
Our people are tougher and stronger and meaner and smarter.
For the fascist, war and violence are means of strengthening society by culling the weak and glorifying.
I love that. It's one of my favorite Trump moments.
Heroic warriors.
But look what he did there. He took an instance of Trump just making fun of a weirdo. Now, he happened to be a weirdo with a disability. But he was doing like a schoolyard bully, just make fun of the dork thing. Because the dork happened to be critical of him. And he's then conflating that with Hitler telling people to exterminate the weak elements of society. Like, can we see the propaganda here? Can we see how this is being exaggerated? Racy says Sargon should talk to Count Dankula for insight. What are you talking about? They're best friends, aren't they?
I am your warrior. I am your justice. I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
Fifth and finally, disdain of women and
The fuck was that?
LGBTQ plus people. Authoritarianism imposes hierarchies. It's about order. Fascism's idea of order is organized around a particular hierarchy of male dominance. The fascist heroic warrior is male. Women are relegated to subservient roles. In fascism, anything that challenges the traditional heroic male roles of protector, provider, and controller of the family is considered a threat to the social order. Fascism seeks to eliminate
necessarily.
homosexuals, non-binary, transgender, and queer people because they are thought to challenge or weaken the heroic male warrior.
I will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth.
These 5 elements of fascism fit together
God, that's
and
cringe.
reinforce each other. Rejection of democracy in favor of a strong
Actually,
man.
let's go back to
I
that.
will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth.
Assigned at birth. That's left-wing talk. No conservative says assigned at birth, because that implies that gender is something you can assign to someone rather than being inherent in your person.
These five elements of fascism fit together.
Yeah, they fit together. They make sense like a bubble makes sense, man. They fit together like fucking clockwork. These 5 elements, we figured it out. Trump is a fascist. Let's see. Schoolyard bullying versus the T4 euthanasia program. I see very few differences. Yeah. That's the thing. Sitting upright is what's helping my back pain right now. So, I'm going to keep streaming.
And reinforce each other. Rejection of democracy in favor of a strong man depends on galvanizing popular rage. Popular rage draws on a nationalism based on a supposed superior race or ethnicity. That superior race or ethnicity is justified by a social Darwinist idea of strength and violence, as exemplified by heroic warriors. Strength, violence, and the heroic warrior are centered on male power. These 5 elements find exact expression in Donald Trump. His uniquely American version of fascism is rooted largely in white Christian nationalism.
There's diversity within the Trump movement. And so while there are people like Nick Fuentes who are like, yeah, we need a dictator to come in and make everyone Christians, there's a lot of other support Trump for a lot of different reasons. And you can't just all lump them into the far right category, because that's just not how it is. For Trump, I think a lot of it is a cult of personality more than a cult of the state. And while cult of personality is important in fascism, you also have to have a cult of the state. And the problem with calling Trump supporters fascists is that they're all like anti-establishment nut jobs. They're all like Alex Jones, like conspiracy theorists, deep state, fucking anti-government, anti-mask, and don't tread on me, don't tell me what to do, don't raise my taxes, don't take my guns. Like, that is a strong aspect of American conservative ideology that does not have a place in fascism. And there's no sort of state-centric religious fanaticism within the Trump movement. It is rather a hodgepodge of different forms of fanaticism that all kind of coalesce around this figure of Trump as the central figurehead. And it's so really the cult of personality has far more influence than anything else on the Trump wave. Bob Bobby says, do you think it's good that the U.S. government take more control of decisions of the state? I assume you're talking about federal versus state governments, right? I use Americans' opinions of these issues as analogies for what to think of Europe often. Okay, so you're talking about federalism. The people whose temperature I take for understanding the left in America, and they seem to be very pro-federal government, very anti-states' rights, anti-10th Amendment. And their system seems to work really well, and moreover, it keeps them out of the way. Like, they don't get involved in war because every canton has to agree to a war. You know, every canton has to agree to pretty much everything. That's how I understand it. It's like how it used to be under the Articles of Confederation. And maybe when they were struggling to pay back their debts at the beginning of the country's history, that became a problem for them. But yeah, I think that individual states can have a better chance of getting more things done and trying out new things, trying out new ideas. I think that politics is so locked right now. National politics is so locked now in a 50-50 split between radical, diverging parties that it's hard to even call ourselves a cohesive nation anymore. You know, I was actually reading on Quora yesterday, I believe, about the 20th century politics of America. And it's interesting how in the 20th century, the Democrats didn't really stand for anything, and the Republicans didn't really stand for anything either. They were these two very similar coalitions of people who got together for odd reasons. And you could pretty much be anything. You could be a Republican and be anything you want, and you could be a Democrat and be anything you want. And at the time, people criticized that system. At the time, people criticized that as, the parties are the same. I mean, they say that these days, right? They say, the two parties are the same. They're not. But back then, they used to be. But the weird thing is that we're seeing, now that the parties have diverged from each other to a significant extent, it's actually, the political climate is getting a lot worse. And things are getting a lot more polarized between camps. So it just goes to show how the national community is having a hard time being a community now. And I'm wondering if that is telling us that we should have focused more on building up local government. Bob Bobby says fascism focuses more on centralization of power, while liberalism the opposite. Yeah. And so there's kind of an intersection between the more fascistic and the more liberal side in the Trump movement. Claudia says, I'm sorry, Trump is George Lincoln Rockwell, James Mason, or David Duke now, according to this. Yeah, pretty much. I don't know. James Mason. Let's say she has an uncle. That's the James Mason I know from the old movies. I don't know of a far right American James Mason. All right, let's say she has an uncle. Federal versus state, sorry. Yeah, I got what you're saying, Bob. Kleptocracy, Carl, too. What's the context there? I don't know. Racy says the Republicans and Democrats back then were like two hands that wash each other, not a means of contention. Yeah, it was a way of having a two-party system without actually having two parties. It was just basically one party. Just interesting. Polarization of society didn't polarize politics. Yeah, it did, didn't it? But that video overall. So the last video we reviewed, the What is Fascism? That was pretty decent. That was pretty good. And it was very succinct, and it got its point across in 24 minutes, which I approve of. This one feels a lot more like propaganda. This one feels a lot more like liberal propaganda. So I'm not a huge fan of this one.